Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. I want to give thanks to Falcon Settlement for sponsoring this week's episode. Falcon provides safe and reliable title work and real estate settlements, providing top-quality real estate services at a very competitive rate for lenders, realtors, buyers, and sellers since 1982. They strive to provide timely and organized services, scheduling closings at your convenience. Their home office is located in Hawthorne, PA, with a branch office in DuBois, PA. For more information, visit falconsettlement.com. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode of Killer Stories, email me at killerstoriеspodcast@gmail.com. It's a great way to help promote your business. This week's case was suggested by listener Mike C. He wrote in asking me to cover convicted murderer Susan Monica. She is labeled as a serial killer, but only has 2 verified victims. I shouldn't say only, I don't mean it like that, but a serial killer typically has 3 or more victims. As you will find out, police believe that there have been many more over the years. Susan Monica was born 1948 in California as Stephen Buchanan. It wasn't until after an honorable discharge from the military that she began identifying as a woman. She worked as a welder in the U.S. Navy, and after she was discharged, her job was working on submarines in the Bay Area of California. As she grew older, her dream was to own land in the middle of nowhere and live off-grid. She purchased 20 acres in the Pacific Northwest, deep in the rural town of Weimar, Oregon, home of the one and only Bigfoot trap. The area is so remote that it was once thought to be the perfect place for Sasquatch to reside. In 1974, Forest Service approved construction by the North American Wildlife Research Team. They built a 10 by 10 foot wooden box secured in each corner by telephone poles. The box is held together with heavy-duty metal bands surrounding it. For 6 years, they supplied the trap with dead animal carcasses as bait. Even though in the area people swear to have seen 18-inch human-like footprints, the trap only caught bears. My first thought was, no one knows the diet of Bigfoot. Perhaps they're vegetarian. In 1980, it was decided to permanently bolt the door open, and the infamous Bigfoot trap has since become a tourist attraction. Anyways, back to our story. Susan started from scratch building a pig pen and a small area for herself to sleep. The structure was literally only large enough for a bed, a TV, and a small stove. There was no bathroom. In fact, the property had no running water or electricity. She used the great outdoors as her personal toilet. Susan had a few solar panels that powered her TV and any other necessary items. She started her own business called White Queen Construction, and she used her welding skills to build iron gates and fences. Over time, Susan's land became littered with junk. I've seen pictures. She was definitely a hoarder. And because she didn't have an actual house, it piled up outside. She was a loner and rarely made an appearance in town. When she did, others were intimidated by her. Susan had a very large stature and was typically dirty and smelly from working on her farm. Those who were brave enough to interact with Susan found out that she was actually very kind and generous. She did her own butchering of her pigs, most of which was sold to meat markets, but Susan donated some of the meat to local community center, feeding those in need. With her iron fencing business and running a farm, Susan felt like she needed some help. She put an ad on Craigslist asking for a handyman to help her with odd jobs around the farm. People came and went, lending a helping hand in exchange for cash. On some occasions, Susan allowed them to park a truck or a trailer on her land, the cheapest rent around. 59-year-old Stephen Delicino was one man who responded to her Craigslist ad. This case was featured in an episode of the Oxygen series Snapped. Stephen's daughter agreed to be interviewed for the show. She stated she hadn't spoken to her father in years and he was estranged from the whole family. I didn't gather details as to why, but at this point in his life, he was essentially living as a drifter. Because of this, no one really noticed when he went missing in 2012. It wasn't until January 1st of 2014 that any attention was brought to Susan Monica and her pig farm. 56-year-old Robert Haney had mysteriously gone missing. His children weren't able to reach him for months, and he was a no-show at Thanksgiving and Christmas. Just a little background on Robert Haney. As a teenager, he ran away from home. Some thought that if he ran from his problems as a teen, who's to say that he didn't run off to start a new life now? Because he did have his fair share of problems. Robert recently went through a divorce. He and his wife had 5 children together, making the split exceptionally heartbreaking. He also struggled to get past an incident where one of his family members had been assaulted. It troubled him deeply enough that he drank from sunup to sundown to numb the pain. He owned a truck with a small attached trailer. He and his dog traveled in his truck and survived by doing odd jobs here and there. When he saw Susan's ad on Craigslist, it seemed like a perfect choice: honest work and a place to park his trailer. His assigned task was to start construction of a house for Susan. She was beginning to feel cramped in her little sleeping structure. January 1st, 2014. Robert Haney's children tracked down his whereabouts and showed up at Susan Monica's farm. They explained that they were looking for their father. They hadn't seen or heard from him in 2 months. It wasn't unusual to go a few weeks without hearing from him. He liked his peace and quiet out there in the woods, but he would never willingly miss a visit with his kids over the holidays. Susan admitted that Robert had been working for her, but up and quit a few months ago. She claimed that he gave her money and asked if she could watch over his dog while he took care of some business. First red flag, his truck and motorcycle were both parked on her property. If he did leave, it wasn't in his own vehicle. She told the Haney boys to go ahead and gather up their father's things to take with them. As they entered his trailer, they became even more leery of Susan's story. Not only did he leave his truck, his motorcycle, and his dog, but there on the table sat all of Robert's tools. He was a handyman. His tools were essential for him to make money, and he never went anywhere without them. Something seemed off, but Susan stuck to her story that in September of 2013, he left. Robert didn't have a cell phone or a bank account. The only traceable thing he owned was an EBT card, which stands for Electronic Benefit Transfer. He was on welfare, and money was added to the card each month for him to use on food, aka food stamps. In December of 2013, 3 months after Susan said Robert left, his EBT card was used. If he took off, you would expect the transaction to happen far away, but it was right there in town. I say right there, but I mean the closest town, which was still about 25 miles from Susan's farm. Video surveillance caught the user of the EBT card on video, and wouldn't you know it, it was Susan Monica. She was taken to the police station to be formally questioned and seemed to have an excuse for everything. She said Robert gave her the card when he left as further payment for watching his dog. It was also discovered that she pawned 2 rifles the day after Robert supposedly took off. Super suspicious. A warrant was issued to search Susan's property. The smell was unbearable. Pig poo, human poo, trash, and decaying human flesh. While searching, police found a human leg and foot that was severed at the femur bone. The bones had chew marks all over them. When this evidence was presented to Susan, she didn't deny what it was or who it was even. She admitted that Robert Haney didn't leave. Susan explained that he drank quite a lot and must have been too clumsy around the pigs. She heard them making a lot of noise and walked down to the pig pen to see what was going on. She saw that they were eating something and realized that it was Robert. Here's where things get a bit graphic. He was still alive and moaning. He was ripped open at the stomach, and his internal organs were spilling out. Susan decided to do the humane thing and shoot him to put him out of his misery. She later told investigators, quote, "I do that for my animals, and this was the first time I did it for a human being. And I knew it was wrong, but if it were one of my pigs suffering out there, I would have done the same thing," unquote. Then she grabbed an axe and cut him into pieces. She placed garbage bags full of his body parts in her barn. After which a wild animal must have dragged the severed leg down by the pond, where it was later found by police. This quickly changed gears from a missing person case to a homicide. A more extensive search was conducted on Susan's property. They dug through piles of garbage, and it took them over 3 weeks to cover the entire 20 acres. 2 separate sets of human remains were found. They were positively identified as 56-year-old Robert Haney and 59-year-old Stephen Delacino, both of which worked for her as handymen. They continued their search digging holes on her land, but no other evidence was found pointing to more victims. The remains of Robert Haney and Stephen Delacino both showed a gunshot to the head and teeth marks on the bones. When Susan was questioned about Stephen, she said that back in 2012, for an unknown reason, he had repeatedly shot himself in the head, and that one shot was fired by her in self-defense. After his death, her pigs began to consume his body. When Susan discovered what was happening, she dragged him away from the pigs and buried his body. I call bullshit. Neighbors came forward stating that they witnessed Susan feeding dead house pets, other livestock, and roadkill to her pigs, which leads me to believe she did not purchase feed as a normal pig farmer would. During a videotaped interrogation, Susan Monica said, quote, "I do not value human life very much. My feeling is the only thing wrong with this planet is there's people on it. If not for us, all the other animals, even dodo birds, would be here." I personally believe that she purposefully fed these men to her pigs. Maybe they were starving, and since she had such little value to their lives, they became pig feed. One of Susan's neighbors had this to say, quote, "She trashed her place. She trashed herself. The people she was around. She trashed our lives. There are some people out there that are not ever going to recover from it. I won't, but at least I'm alive," unquote. Susan Monica was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, abuse of a corpse, and identity theft. Her case brought a lot of media attention because, well, she fed humans to her pigs, but also because of her appearance in court. I'm not sure if she went through a full transition, as in surgery or even taking estrogen, but Susan Monica was bald as a cue ball. She had multiple different wigs that she wore throughout her court appearances. One mugshot shows her in a long brunette wig, and another in her natural bald state. Other pictures from her trial show her in a short blonde wig and badly drawn-on eyebrows. Honestly, she looks like a different person in every image. My YouTube viewers are seeing these images pop up on the screen, but I will also share them on my social media. Her videotaped interview was played for the jury. Susan had a breakdown, forcing the judge to call a recess. She explained that she simply couldn't stand to watch. Oh, please. You said it yourself, you don't value human life. Well, I guess the exception being your own, Susan. During her trial, she changed her story one last time. She said that Robert Haney had come on to her and she shot him in self-defense. But the nail in her coffin was the fact that she simply couldn't stop talking, constantly making statements incriminating herself. Phone calls that were recorded in prison and mentioning that 17 more people went missing on her farm. Even though no evidence was found to support this, police believe that there were more victims. And when a cellmate was released, Susan sent her a birthday card signed "From the sweetest murderer in Jackson County." To the jury, that was basically a confession. It only took 1 hour for the jury to come back with a guilty verdict. Judge Tim Barnack sentenced her to 50 years. She was 66 years old at this time, meaning she would never be released. Judge Barnack had this to say to Susan Monica. "You shot 2 people and fed them to your pigs. I don't know how else I can put it. You valued pigs more than you value people. It may sound harsh, but you're a cold-blooded killer." After her sentencing, it was announced that her pigs were to be euthanized. She begged the judge to have her pigs butchered and donated to the community center. But since she fed the pigs random dead animals, the meat was not considered safe for consumption, which made everyone in town cringe, knowing that over the years they have probably eaten meat from Susan Monica's pigs. After her conviction, other people came forward telling stories of answering the Craigslist ad to be Susan's handyman. They consider themselves lucky to be alive. Susan Monica is currently serving her 50-year sentence at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. Big thanks to Mike C. for suggesting this case and to Falcon Settlement Inc. for sponsoring today's episode. You can email me story suggestions to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at KillerStoriesPC. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment and leave me a review. I wanted to give a shout out to Lily Marie 791. She said, "Bobby is extremely concise in the telling of these stories, which are often gruesome, but her calm demeanor makes it very easy to digest. I find her voice even relaxing. Bobby, I've listened to countless podcasts for years, and you have a gift." Thank you for your kind words, Lily. And to all of you, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer story.